You weigh 3 kilograms. You cannot walk, talk, or feed yourself. You cannot keep yourself warm. You have no working immune system to speak of. And somewhere, just outside the firelight, something large is listening for exactly the kind of sound you make when you are hungry. How did any human baby survive that? Not one baby, not one lucky afternoon. Hundreds of thousands of years of babies in every climate, on every continent, generation after generation, somehow making it to adulthood long enough to start the whole cycle over again. The answer is not what you expect. It is not instinct, not individual heroism, not the toughness of ancient people. It is something far more interesting. And there is one piece of it, one practice almost every modern society quietly abandoned in the last century that may explain more about modern parenting struggles than anything else. That is where we are going today. The truth is, ancient humans built a child-rearing system so sophisticated that we are still only beginning to understand how it worked, and how much we lost when we stopped using it. Chapter 1. The village was not a metaphor. Here is a biological fact that most people do not appreciate. Human babies are born far too early. Not because of bad luck, on purpose, evolutionarily speaking. A fully developed newborn brain would require a skull so large it could not pass through the birth canal. So we evolved to give birth when the brain is only about 25% of its adult size. A chimpanzee is born at roughly 45%. What that means is that a huge slice of human brain development has to happen outside the womb, in the open world, while the infant is entirely helpless. Scientists call this secondary altriciality. It has one enormous implication. A human infant cannot survive without social support. Not theoretically, not for a few hours, not alone, ever. Hunter-gatherer societies solved this with distributed care. Every adult in the band had a role. Children were passed between arms, carried, fed, watched over by people who were not their parents. Anthropologists studying the Aka people of Central Africa found that fathers were within arm's reach of their infants roughly 47% of the time. That is more than most fathers in industrialized countries today. And grandmothers. This is where it gets fascinating. Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes proposed in the 1990s that human menopause, which is almost unique in the animal kingdom, evolved specifically so that older women would stop reproducing and redirect that energy toward their grandchildren's survival. The grandmother hypothesis. Studies of traditional societies found that the presence of a maternal grandmother is one of the strongest single predictors of whether a child survives past age 2. Elephant herds do something structurally identical. When a calf is born, experienced older females, called allomothers, surround the mother. They guide the calf to its feet, shield it from the herd's movement, monitor it for days. They are not doing this by accident. It is a system. Lion prides operate similarly, with non-breeding females nursing cubs that are not their own. The thread is the same. Child survival across highly social species is almost never a solo act. If you grew up around a strong grandmother, yours or someone else's, drop her in the comments. The grandmother hypothesis lives or dies on cases exactly like that, and I want to hear the ones the textbooks miss. Chapter 2. Nobody slept alone. In every observed hunter-gatherer society, in the overwhelming majority of traditional cultures across every continent, infants sleep in physical contact with an adult. Not in a crib, not down the hall, against a human body all night. Anthropologist James McKenna spent decades studying infant sleep and proposed that a sleeping adult's breathing and gentle movement may help regulate an infant's own breathing during an early developmental window when that regulation is still inconsistent. His research sits at the intersection of co-sleeping and what we now call sudden infant death syndrome. The picture is not fully resolved, but the underlying biology is not in dispute. Human infant physiology developed expecting physical contact during sleep. The separate nursery is approximately 200 years old, maybe less. For almost all of human existence, that is not how this worked. Benefits that appear in the research: more stable infant body temperature, more regulated breathing, longer breastfeeding duration. The risks that modern medicine points to, and they are real, involve specific modern conditions: soft mattresses, alcohol-impaired adults, high room temperatures. Ancestral sleep environments did not look like that. This is not an argument to dismantle modern safety advice. It is an argument for understanding what we changed and why the adjustment may have costs we did not fully anticipate. Chapter 3. Carry everything, feed constantly. A hunter-gatherer mother needed to cover several kilometers a day over rough ground, forage, and keep a physically helpless infant alive simultaneously. You cannot solve that problem by putting the baby down. Predators, cold, silence is survival. The solution was constant physical contact. What we now call baby wearing was the ancestral default. The biology supports this. Newborns have a strong palmar grasp reflex, the instinctive grip that appears the moment you touch their palm. That reflex is a vestige, almost certainly left over from an earlier phase of primate evolution, when clinging to a moving caregiver was the only option. It is not a random quirk. It is a record of how we used to live. Infants who are carried more cry roughly 50% less than those left alone for significant periods. That is not a parenting philosophy. It is a measurement of a biological need being met. Breastfeeding followed the same logic. In hunter-gatherer populations, nursing continued for 2 to 4 years and happened several times per hour in the early months. This serves 3 functions simultaneously: nutrition, stress regulation in the infant, and natural contraception that spaces births roughly 3 to 4 years apart. That spacing mattered enormously. A mother carrying one child to relative independence before becoming pregnant again was not following advice. She was doing the only thing the system could sustain. Wet nursing, breastfeeding another mother's child, appears across virtually every traditional culture. Multiple women in a group sharing nursing duties kept orphaned and ill infants alive and deepened social bonds in ways that had downstream survival benefits for everyone. Among our primate relatives, all of this is ordinary. Chimpanzee mothers carry their infants for years. Bonobo communities share nursing duties. We are not unusual for doing this. We became unusual when we stopped. Chapter 4. Children taught children. Here is something modern child development frameworks almost entirely overlook. In hunter-gatherer bands, children were not primarily raised by adults. They were embedded in mixed age groups of other children, with older kids teaching younger ones and adults maintaining a watching presence rather than a directing one. This is not neglect. It is a different theory of how learning happens. Children in these groups developed autonomy, negotiation, risk assessment, and problem-solving in conditions that approximated real challenges rather than controlled classroom environments. Falling down, resolving conflict, figuring out how fire behaves. These were not dangers to be eliminated, they were the curriculum. Wolf packs operate on a structurally similar model. Juvenile wolves learn through integration with the pack rather than through direct adult instruction. Older juveniles model behaviors, younger ones follow and imitate. Adults intervene at thresholds, not constantly. The result is competence, not just compliance. The modern instinct to supervise every moment of childhood, to remove every risk, to be the primary teacher of everything a child knows, is a very recent and very particular idea. It is also, some researchers argue, part of why rates of childhood anxiety are climbing. Ancient human children were independent within a safety net. That is different from both isolation and overmanagement. Chapter 5. They did not hide death. This is the chapter almost nobody includes when they talk about ancient childhood, and it may be the most important one. In hunter-gatherer societies, children saw death regularly, not as a horror, but as a fact. Grandparents died, animals were killed for food, infants died, and that happened often enough that it was part of the texture of life. Children were not removed from this. They were present for it. The psychological argument is not that this was pleasant. It was not. The argument is that children raised within a visible life cycle developed a different relationship with impermanence. They understood that they were part of something that moved. Grief existed, and the archaeological record shows it clearly. Infant burials, carefully arranged, sometimes with flowers, with grave goods. Ancient humans mourned. Deeply. But they mourned within a community, not alone, and children witnessed that too. The isolation of children from death is almost entirely a 20th century phenomenon, at least in the Western world. Hospitals made dying invisible. Funeral homes took over what families once handled at home. Children grew up without ever watching someone they loved leave the world slowly. Some researchers in thanatology, the study of death and dying, argue that this shift contributed to what we now call death anxiety, the chronic background dread that many adults carry without ever being able to name it cleanly. When death has never been ordinary, it becomes monstrous. Ancient children were not protected from the fact that things end. They were given a framework for it. And here is the synthesis. Ancient humans kept children alive through a system, not a collection of individual acts. A social architecture that distributed care, contact, and responsibility across an entire group. Allo-mothering, shared sleep, constant physical contact, gradual child-paced autonomy in mixed-age groups, and a relationship with death that was woven into life rather than sealed behind closed doors. None of this is a call to abandon modern medicine, vaccine schedules, or car seats. The reduction in child mortality since 1800 is one of the most significant achievements in human history. Full stop. But within the behavioral layer, the social and emotional environment of early childhood, there is a real case that industrialized societies quietly dismantled structures that were doing important work without fully understanding what that work was. The rates of postpartum depression, infant sleep disorders, and parental burnout in modern Western countries are not random. They are what happens when a system designed for a village is asked to run on two people. What ancient humans knew was not complicated. You do not raise a child alone. You do not do it as a couple. You do it as a group, with grandmothers and aunts and neighbors and older children all taking genuine day-to-day responsibility. The exhaustion is distributed. The failure points are redundant. The child is embedded in a web of connection thick enough to catch them from any direction. That was not a philosophy. That was engineering. If any part of this changed how you think about modern parenting or childhood or what we inherit from people who lived with none of our tools, subscribe and stay close. The next one goes even deeper into what ancient minds understood about the world around them that we are only now finding ways to measure. What they had, mostly, was each other. And for most of what matters, it turned out to be enough.